Hello, I'm Dr. Amaleya Goneos-Malka. Welcome to Womanity, Woman in Unity, the show that celebrates women's milestone achievements in their struggle for liberation, self-emancipation, human rights, democracy, and much more. Joining us today for our series on women in the judiciary is Judge Fayeeza Kathree-Setiloane, who is Judge of the Supreme Court of Appeal. Previously, she served as Acting Judge of the Labour Appeal Court, Acting Judge of the Competition Appeal Court, and High Court Judge of Gauteng. Prior to her roles in the judiciary, she was a practicing advocate. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me on your show this afternoon.
It is a great pleasure. This series is one that I look forward to on an annual basis. Thinking back in time, you obtained your LLB degree from the University of Natal in Durban, 1991. Thereafter, Masters in Law from Georgetown University Law School, Washington, D.C., the USA, as a Fulbright Scholar in 1993. And when I think about this period, it was upheaval. South Africa was in the middle of negotiating its new democracy, undergoing enormous political and social transformation. So I wanted to ask you, did the context of the country at that time influence you to pursue law, or were there other factors that motivated you?
No, I think it was very much what I grew up in, and it was apartheid. And I was a drama student, English majors, politics, drama, all of those things. And I didn't think about law. But towards the sort of end of my drama degree, I started getting involved with the trade union movement and organizations, student organizations at the university. Well, of course, before that, student organizations at the university as well. We became very involved with workers' rights at the University of Natal, and belonged to a student organization that basically organized, around workers and what their rights were in the context of our university setting. And I suppose, being an activist in my local community as well, I was always drawn to public interest law. I was always drawn to human rights law. And, I think that kind of, by default, took me into the law route. And that's how I began with my LLB degree. While doing my LLB degree, I got very involved with the Center for Social Legal Studies, assisting with editing on their human rights law book. I worked on a part-time basis as a labor law researcher. So all of those things impacted what I was going to do after my degree, and basically follow a kind of public interest route and a career path. So I joined the Legal Resources Center, which was one of the first public interest organizations in the country. And I think that further shaped my perspective on the law and how it could impact society and how it could transform society, and how I, as a young lawyer, could contribute to producing a transformed society. When I studied, I was fortunate to get the Fulbright scholarship and traveled to Washington to study. Without that, I wouldn't have had that opportunity. It would have been too expensive to go. So I'm very fortunate that I had, that opportunity. And I then studied, subjects like international human rights law, like sexual orientation and the law, homelessness law, international human rights law, things that were not offered at the South African university at the time. But when I came back 3 years later, having also spent some time teaching at the University of Maryland, after Georgetown Law School, when I got back to South Africa, all of these things were now being offered at university. It allowed me to kind of just slot into that. And it was 1994 when I came back, basically. And I got involved with the national elections at the time for 3 or 4 months, and then immediately got a job at the University of Western Cape, where I taught international human rights law. And I led I worked in the Community Law Center, working as a senior researcher on their women's law project. Yeah.
And just as a little digression, and I ask this because having had the opportunity to study overseas and be immersed in a different culture, I thought was a really invaluable experience for me. If you could just share a little about your views of, if someone is given that opportunity, whether they should take it or not.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. If you are given that opportunity, please take it. If you're not given the opportunity, find a way of creating that opportunity. It was one of the most growing and developmental experiences for me. It broadened my perspective on life. It broadened me intellectually. It broadened me socially. My confidence levels just were increased, fivefold. I mean, so just broadly, that experience was so good for me. And I see it with my colleagues as well. Those that have had that opportunity to study abroad, how they just have so much more confidence in themselves. And they are able to broker and to navigate whatever whatever challenges are placed in front of them. They're able to basically navigate that.
Yeah, confidence is so important in absolutely everything. So the timing when you came back, 1994, apart from political and social transformation, it was also an important time, I think, for being a woman, because let's face it, up until that time, we were all kind of second or third class citizens. So could you share with us what types of obstacles you've encountered due to being a woman, and also how you navigated those spaces, particularly where the traditional image of someone in the law probably didn't look like you?
Yeah, in prior to being a judge, I was at the Johannesburg Bar where I practiced as an advocate. And I think when I was there after about 7 years, I wrote an article about, and it was a short article in the magazine called The Advocate. And I said there that when I arrived at the bar in 1995, this was the first time I felt discriminated against as a woman, because I think we were so involved with race discrimination throughout my existence as a young person. The struggle that we fought was race, race, race all the way. And so you never looked to yourself to see how, as a woman, you were being discriminated. And I think the first time I had to actually look at that was when I was earning for myself, and how did the legal world perceive me as a young lawyer, at the Constitutional Court as a young clerk, because I was part of the first cohort of clerks. Didn't feel discriminated against at all. We were all young lawyers. We were all treated equally. We were not competing for resources there at all. At the Legal Resources Center, when I did my fellowship for 2 years, I wasn't competing with anybody. But suddenly here, I'm now a practicing advocate, and I've got to now earn, I've got to earn for myself. And now I start competing. I don't just compete with my other colleagues around me, young colleagues that I've just joined the bar, but I can compete with senior colleagues. I compete with my mentors at the bar. I compete with what you called in the old days a pupil master. You were all in competition with each other. And that's when it became the discrimination actually felt so real and in your face, because as a woman, you were struggling, basically. You were struggling to pick up briefs, and you were fully reliant and fully dependent on attorneys, right, to give you this work. And of course, I came in from abroad, having lived in Durban all my life. Now suddenly I'm in Joburg. I didn't study at university in Joburg, so very little people knew me. Those that knew me from the LRC, knew me from the Constitutional Court. And fortunately, I had a bit of that. So I could pick up public interest work, some early Constitutional Court cases, etc. But it was the first time where I actually felt discriminated against, where I felt I am probably on par with all of my male colleagues at the bar of my age group, my experience, but yet they were picking up far more commercial work or general just briefs than I was. So women were in those days, they were actually pigeonholed into doing family law work. And I kind of deliberately resisted. I had nothing against it, and I had great admiration for my colleagues that did family law work, women that came in before me, women that were there with me. But I basically decided at that point, I'm not going to allow myself to be pigeonholed. I need to achieve something. This is the kind of work I'm going to do, and I'm going to, even if it means struggling through this, I'm going to do it, And slowly, I got very involved as well in the bar politics. It was a very white, masculine bar when I joined it, and so that had to change. And the more and more women got involved, the more Black people got involved in the bar, the more the bar changed. And I think the challenges that they now face is quite different from what we faced in respect to briefing patterns of attorneys, where you had to be part of a boys' network, of an old boys' network. You had to be playing golf with male attorneys on a Wednesday and a Saturday. You had to be, you had to do all of those male things to do it. And if you resisted all of that, which I did, and very stubbornly did, you struggled. But with all of that struggle, I was just fortunate enough to get a lot of, good public interest, constitutional work, administrative law work. I was fortunate to be in some high-profile cases around women. The early challenges to the constitutionality of the Termination of Pregnancy Act. So those early cases that came to the court that challenged the act on the basis that the fetus had a right to life, or a woman under 16 had to have the consent of her parents. Those were important challenges for the reproductive health of young women, for their dignity. And I was fortunate to be involved with that. And I was also fortunate to be involved with some very interesting governmental work around the RAND Commission, for instance, around there were just so many things. A lot of interesting competition law matters that broke new ground, etc., which a lot of women were not doing. And I was fortunate to break into some of those areas, telecommunications work, which now you see more and more women,
How did you do the breakthroughs?
It was hard. I think it's, you just work hard, you just show that what you produce is excellent, that you have the requisite skills, that you have the confidence. I think confidence is the most important thing. Confidence is the most important thing. And you've got to, when you're in court, you've got to really confidently argue, no matter how bad your case is, and no matter how difficult the questions that are put to you by judges, because the judges were vicious in those days. And if you were a young woman, they wanted to test you. The first time I appeared in the Constitutional Court, for instance, I was being tested. You could see you were a young clerk in this court. Now let's see if you have the ability to do this. When I appeared for the first time in the Supreme Court of Appeal, you had a bench of men, 5 men, you could actually see how they were trying to test you. And then you emerge from that feeling, I did that. So it's confidence, it's preparation, you can't be a perfectionist. And that was something I learned, that in as much as I was a perfectionist, I had to learn not to be a perfectionist, and I had to learn to be a risk taker. And as a lawyer, and as a woman lawyer, we do not take risks. But men, I turned away in my first year of being at the bar, a brief which concerned, in those days, 600 million, a corporate matter concerning one of our parastatals. The total amount involved was 600 million. And I turned to the attorney when he phoned me, and I said to him, "Oh no, I can't deal with that. I don't have sufficient commercial experience." And yet the person they eventually briefed in it, the young junior, didn't have that experience. But it took me a few years before I learned I need the confidence to say yes. And then you apply yourself, as all lawyers do. You apply yourself, and you learn. And as you pick up work, you learn, and you become an expert in the area. And that's what I basically did. I just you stuck with it. You made mistakes. You were highly successful, but you took everything together, everything in the same pot, and you then navigated your way through that to emerge as a successful lawyer. Yeah.
And I think that's such an important insight. It's not, we don't live in these neat little boxes where this happens and that happens, but everything is layered and everything is in the cooking pot. Yeah. And if you have that confidence, go out and do it, because each experience that you have builds exponentially.
Mm. And that's how I think at 45 or 44, I thought, I think I'm now ready for the bench. I did a little detour from the bar. I spent about 4 years at Worksmans, which is an attorney's law firm. And I it was not traditional at the time as an advocate to join an attorney's law firm. So when I did that, I kind of became an in-house lawyer. And it was a deliberate move on my part. Firstly, Worksmans invited me. When they invited me, I thought about it, and I thought, this is going to give me the commercial experience that I need for my future as a lawyer. I feel like I perfected the kind of public law, constitutional law, admin law areas of the law, and I really need now to get this commercial experience. And I took that opportunity. They invited me in. I took it, and people may have been critical at the time to say, how does she leave the bar to go and join the sidebar? But I remained an advocate, and I worked as an in-house counsel. So by the time I was invited to the bench, to act on the bench when I was on the bench when I was 44, I felt like I was a fully rounded lawyer. And I think that's what you need before you decide to go to the bench, to be a fully rounded lawyer, both in public law and in commercial law, because those are the cases that you're basically dealing with all the time. Yeah.
And given the breadth of your experiences, are there a couple of cases that have stayed with you because of their impact on a particular area in your life or field?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one would be the two abortion cases which challenged the constitutionality of the Termination of Pregnancy Act. The other one was and I think insofar as my contribution to transformation and the change of law goes, and this constitutional project that we're all involved in our country, I think would be the Same-Sex Marriages Act. The creation of the Civil Union Act, and prior to that, the challenge to the constitutionality of the Marriage Act. And I was involved in that challenge for about 4 or 5 years of my time at the bar. We went from the High Court to the Supreme Court of Appeal to the Constitutional Court. So that was one of the kind of cases that will always stay with me, and what we achieved there for the dignity of gay and lesbian and LGBTQ people. Yeah.
How does that make you feel to have contributed to something that's so important in the lives of many people?
Yeah, I'm very proud of that. I'm very, very proud of that. I think it's something. It's an experience that I've learned from. I was very fortunate to be involved in that, and I think it was because I came back with that experience from the US, having done sexual orientation in the law, that the attorney's firm picked up on and thought, let us bring her into the matter. And I was probably the only heterosexual person involved in that challenge, which is also very interesting. But certainly a proud moment for me, and I was very happy to be part of that, to be part of that little bit of history. Yeah.
I love that you've had all of these diverse experiences, and each one has built and opened doors for other opportunities. Looking at where you are today, you're a judge of the Supreme Court of Appeal. For someone who's never encountered the legal system, how would you explain the role of the Supreme Court of Appeal and the kinds of matters that come before it?
Yeah. Can I just say before that, I was an acting judge at the Supreme Court of Appeal before I became a judge there. I was also a acting judge of the Constitutional Court, and you mentioned of the Labour Appeal Court and the Competition Appeal Court, and I think all of that experience has assisted me as a judge of the Supreme Court of Appeal. All of that appellate experience. So basically, the Supreme Court of Appeal is an intermediate appellate court. So it's one court lower than the Constitutional Court. But it deals with all matters. The matters that go with the Constitutional Court come to us first. So we are not less important than the Constitutional Court. I think that most matters actually stop with us. So most times they'd seek leave. We'd make a decision on something and they'll go to the Constitutional Court for leave to have a hearing in that court. And very often the Constitutional Court says no. And it means that we have made the law in that area of the law. Okay. So although it's an intermediate court and not the highest court of the land, it's a very, very important court. And everything first has to come through the Supreme Court before it goes to the Constitutional Court, unless you're going to the Constitutional Court on direct access. But you have to show that it's in the interests of justice or the exceptional reasons for doing that. So, we would do anything. We would, matters come to us, criminal law matters will come to us, from trials, criminal trials that were heard in the High Court, commercial matters, administrative law matters, constitutional matters, everything. We deal with absolutely everything in the Supreme Court of Appeal, except for competition matters and labor matters. But otherwise, we deal with matters across the field. It's a very important court. There are about 22 judges from across the country, so it's a national court. So judges come from the high courts across the country. These judges have been judges for 14 to 15 years before they come to the Supreme Court of Appeal. So collectively, the 22 judges have a wealth of experience behind them. So don't take it lightly that this is an intermediate appellate court. It is a very important appellate court, and it plays an important role, before matters get to the Constitutional Court, because sometimes we make the law, and that's the law, and it becomes binding. Yeah.
Thinking about laws, I know that our country has introduced several important reforms addressing gender-based violence, as well as domestic violence. And this has also included expanding the recognition of coercive, controlling, and economic abuse under the Domestic Violence Amendment Act. From your perspective as a judge, where do you feel law has made meaningful progress for women? And where do you believe there's still gaps between what the law promises and, in reality, what women experience on a day-to-day?
Yeah, I mean, all of these legislative reforms, and it has impacted ultimately on the safety of women. But in terms of women's lived out experiences, it's not. It hasn't changed the position for women totally, So we still live as women in a very unsafe world. We still as women live in a very unequal world. And one needs to look at power. And I suppose from a feminist perspective, you'll say that power is structured through gender. So you look at, well, who controls the resources? Who sets the norms? Whose voices matter? So I think ultimately the power relations and the ways, the stratification of society and how that power is distributed in society has this impact, has this continuing impact negatively on women. And so one has to look at what the historical rules and norms were. One has to look at patriarchy. One has to look at religious and cultural norms that emerge from this different communities that we've all grown up on, and how that impacts on women. And I think at a public level, women are seem to have made enormous progress, but at a private level, I think. And I think one looks into the home at a private level in our communities. One looks at rural women in particular, and you still see how the lives of women don't kind of meet what the constitutional promise is, So there is no true equality. And for me, one of the most concerning things is violence against women, where you can tap into maybe 50% of the violence that is being meted out against women. But the other 50%, 40%, whatever it is hidden in our communities, it's hidden in our homes. And that's why it's so important to have kind of, the one is substantive equality, and we're achieving that in the workplace. We're achieving that at a more public level, structurally in public organizations, etc. But largely, until there's that structural change, those structural changes in our community, in our families, etc., I think women are not going to have true equality, and they're not going to feel completely safe. So one is heartened by the fact that you have emerging leaders in these families that are going out to universities, that are coming back and educating, the patriarchs in their homes, in their societies, and one hopes that in time will bring about change. But it needs to happen quickly, because, I think the reality is that women don't have real equality yet,
You're 100% right. And when I reflect on stats that come out of the World Economic Forum, I think the latest is 123 years for us to achieve gender equality. But at the same time as you were talking, I was reflecting on a conversation we had a few weeks ago with Professor Qureisha Abdul Karim, who's worked in the aid sector. And one of the things that she said, when she was starting out, that there was so much that women had to negotiate in protecting themselves that depended on men. And now they don't need to. And I just wonder if there's a way from an equality point of view, or maybe I'm just being very aspirant, that if there are ways that we can change things for ourselves that don't necessarily involve men. Don't know how.
Yeah, I think we can. I think we are doing it, and that's what's so encouraging. I think in order to bring about that structural change, that those changes, not just individual mindsets, but it structurally changes the mindset of society. And I think as young, educated women, I think, we need to bring our intellect to all of these things. So just at the health level, the HIV, it's like women had to negotiate through men before. Anything, their reproductive rights, their reproductive health, all of this had to be negotiated through men or through elders in their family, etc. And that's all changed, and there's still 30 or 40% of that people are still kind of still caught up in those little circles.
It's a lot.
Patriarchals. It's a lot, but largely I think we have agency. Women have agency now.
Yeah.
And if I can use that term, I think women have agency, and that's very important. Where we can make our choices, we can negotiate our way through. But it's so important for me, and I see that if we can just move away a little bit from the domestic violence and the whole private public thing, but on that public level, where in the judiciary, for instance, we've got more women leaders in the judiciary than we have men. We have a chief justice that's a woman. We have the judge president of the next highest court that's a woman. I think all of the high courts, save for the Johannesburg and Pretoria high courts, are led by women. So that's an enormous achievement in our short democracy, and these women are doing good jobs. And the next step is now to bring this, you've got to bring intellectual leadership to these organizations. So structurally we changed to this point where we have women in leadership, but now you've got to bring intellectual leadership. And I think that's what's so important. And I see it with these young generations. Look at this Madlanga Commission, the number of women evidence leaders we have. The commission has got a very strong, powerful woman. So we have these emerging lawyers that are just enormously confident and are basically practicing law in a very different time that we practice law, where there are great opportunities for them now. The women in 20, 25 years ago, even as low as 10 years ago, 5 years ago, were basically fighting. We had to fight for this work to come in, and now there's work that is there, that is available to these young lawyers. And with the more work you get, the greater your confidence, the greater your skill set becomes.
And in that, working in your own individual contributions, but also you're opening up the doors for other women to come into the system because of that recognition. Mm-hmm. I wanted to reflect a little on aspects of your career, because besides your judicial responsibilities, you have got teaching, you've got research, you sit on committees, you're part of legal organizations, you're part of academic organizations, and entities such as the Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation, Pro Bono, and Agenda. How do you manage your time and your energy, and what of these additional roles allowed you to contribute that you couldn't give in the courtroom alone?
Yeah, I think most of those organized, the Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation, probono.org, I did in my early years as a judge in the High Court. But by the time I got now to the appellate level, you can do less because you're so consumed by what you do. I mean, you're still, I'm happy to speak to women. I'm still very much involved in the examinations at the bar. I sit on the National Bar Examination Board. And I think we play a very important role there to ensure that the exams that the advocates take are fair exams, but it becomes harder. It really becomes harder as you work your way up through the judiciary, because at the point where we are and we're making law, it's all consuming. So we will try and get involved. I would go from time to time and speak to women in the profession, or speak generally to people in the advocates profession, or assist with some project that they're working on and give my expertise to it. But I can do less and less of that now at this level, But we still have to be involved organizationally at our courts, nationally, as judges, things that are required for the growth of the judiciary and the betterment of the judiciary. So you make the time to be involved in all of that, because ultimately as a judge, it's not a job that we have, it's a vocation. It's a way that we can contribute to change in society, and it's a service we provide. And I think that's an important thing to understand, that it's not about, and I think that's why we leave practice, and because you're now ready to give back to society, and you do it through the judiciary because your country calls for you,
It's like a different chapter in life. It's like a next stage. We're doing this show in Women's Month, and the theme this year is Empowered Women Empower the Nation. From your perspective, what do you see an empowered woman looking like beyond having a job, a title, or occupying a position of authority?
Yeah. I mean, I think the lessons from the last few years are important for us as young, empowered women leaders. And I call us women leaders because whether you're starting off as a young lawyer or whether you're at the level of the Constitutional Court, you are a leader. And I think so important to have clean, ethical, non-corrupt leadership, and to give that to the judiciary. So we can all be leaders, but we have to ensure that we have integrity, that we're honest, that we mete out the law in a way that's fair, without fear and without favor. But importantly, and I take all of these lessons from everything that's been happening recently in society, is ethical leadership. You've got to remain uncorrupted, and that is so important. And you've got to bring your intellect into whatever you do. That is so important, So you've got to be leaders, and you've got to also be intellectual leaders of the judiciary for the future. Yeah.
Wise words, thank you. And I think they have parallels in everything, not just in the judiciary. We're coming towards the end of the show now, and one question I ask all my guests is about some of the factors they feel have contributed to their success. What would you say some of yours have been?
I think you need to be, especially in the judiciary, you need to be fearless as a judge. You need to have integrity. You need to be a team worker. In as much as you make decisions on your own, you make it in a panel. So teamwork is very, very important, But you need to always, if you feel strongly about something, you need to not be afraid to put out your view. So it's very important, particularly in my career, to produce a dissenting judgment if you don't agree. You need to be able to interrogate the law, you need to be able to write very well and reason very well. And I think that's a very important part of being in the judiciary and climbing up the ladder from the high court going to and doing appellate work. It's very important to reason and to write well. And I mean, just to be able to communicate your view to your colleagues, to be able to ensure that the counsel, lawyers, address your concerns in court. So when you go back to do all of this, to write this judgment, because you're going to be sitting with the judgment once everybody leaves the courtroom, a judgment which your colleagues have to buy into. So it's very important that that is well written, that that is well reasoned, that you have, I think the preparation happens at the beginning, before you go into court. It's also very important to be able to carry the court towards the view that you take in a matter. But if judges have a different view in the court, it's very important that you listen to that other view as well. Because very, very, very often you go into court thinking you've got a firm view on the matter, this is how you're going to go. And then somebody on that bench, or even a lawyer, will change your view. So it's very important to be open to the view of your colleagues. It's very important to be open to a different view that the lawyers may bring to the hearing. So all of these things collectively, I think, make you a good judge and make you a candidate for promotion and for success in the judiciary. Yeah. That's hard work. And you are seen generally as a hard worker in the judiciary for people to notice you. Yeah.
That's why you do the work that you do.
Yeah, yeah.
And lastly, as we close out today's show, please share a few words of inspiration that you'd like to pass on to girls and young women who are listening to us.
Yeah. And I think I repeat what I said earlier, that all women have the ability, the potential to become leaders of society. And I see you all as being the future leaders of society. And leadership is not about, it's not about your success only, but it's also about how you succeed in transforming society. And that's something that's very important. So you don't have to struggle because you need to give back to society, but you can be an achiever. You can live a comfortable life. It's not about not being able to earn and only doing public interest work or human rights work, that sort of stuff. It's about whatever you do, make sure that you are comfortable, that you have financial success for yourself and everything that you need to make yourself a holistic person. So ultimately, as a leader, you can give back to society. Yeah. I think
it's like filling your cup so it overflows to others.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
You have been listening to Womanity, Women in Unity, and we have been talking to Judge Fayeeza Kathree-Setiloane, who is a judge of the Supreme Court of Appeal.